Before I begin, the Spitfire Summer Sale, which I think is one of the best ones that they've launched for yonks, is live just for a few more hours, ends tonight at midnight. So do, if you're thinking of grabbing something at a discount, Spitfire stuff is expensive, then do that. And remember that Spitfire is not only about supporting itself, it's about supporting the community. And we pay, I think, 400 or 500 people royalties twice a year. Everything that you buy from Spitfire will have a royalty component that will find its way direct to musicians and artists. Right, plug over mental health. "50 years old, 8 pills. And that's not a good thing. So this isn't a, as my brother will call it, busy brag. This is about some massive regrets that I have about the way in which I've approached the job that we do. I've been really encouraged to see a major agent out in the United States talk about burnout, talk about the culture of overwork, poor work-life balance in Hollywood. I can see that there's threat of the CGI people making a union, an international union, because working for Marvel Pictures appears to be a bit of a strain. And the thing with the internet is, well, it's full of opinions and echo chambers. I've got a 13-year-old and we've started engaging in lots of arguments based on the various different echo chambers in which we operate on the internet. And what I've decided to do as a parent is simply to talk about personal experience and then say it's not what I've experienced, it's not what I have found, it's not as I understand it. So I wanted to talk about mental health. I wanted to talk about burnout, not as a means of preaching onto you what I think you should do. I know many of my close friends and deeply professional collaborators will absolutely disagree with the conclusions I've drawn about myself. But I just wanted to share with you how I got to the number 8 and how I'm trying to reduce that number. And in good news, I'm the happiest and wellest I've ever felt, and I'm enjoying composition more than I ever have. And I would suggest that I'm on the verge of greater success as a composer than I've ever enjoyed before. And I'd love to share with you how I've got to that happy place. After my last A-level exam, I think I had 2 weeks when I slept, just slept all the time. And from that moment, ever since that time, I have been absolutely exhausted until about 6 months ago. And how did this occur? Well, I was always a kind of beta male. I was not competitive, I wasn't physically strong, I wasn't remarkably intelligent. So I found it very difficult to compete with my peers. But the one thing I did observe was that quite a lot of them were incredibly lazy. And that's one thing that I thought, well, I can beat them on that, because I guess, looking back now, I have a degree of tenacity. I guess it's a survival mechanism for beta males like myself. So I simply said to myself, they may be better than you. They may be more intelligent, stronger, more competitive. They may be more talented than you. They may be able to read music. But what you can do is you can outwork them. It is simply by looking at the dictionary definition or the NHS website on what is burnout. And it's a sense of listlessness, of agitation, anxiety, being very tired all the time, and massively frustrated with what it is that you do. And I think that's the lower level of just burning on empty, if you will. I was diagnosed with hypertension when I was probably in my early 30s and instructed by the doctor to give up one of my jobs, either Spitfire Audio or composing. And to a certain degree, I took his advice and went into semi-retirement, throwing myself fully into this vlog, into piano book, into Spitfire Audio, and also composing. I also moved to Edinburgh, and instead of taking up fishing or golf, decided to become a willy and travel up and down to London in a way that was really fast tracking me to an early death. The pandemic for me did have a silver lining. It taught myself and my work that I didn't need to be geographically present all the time. And then I hit rock bottom. I think a combination of tiredness, of just brutal anxiety. I had two moments. One I don't want to talk about because it's too upsetting for me. But the one, I guess, really traumatic moment was taking off on a plane. I hadn't been allowed to medicate myself because the airports had gone dry because of the pandemic. And there was something so desperate about air travel during that time, where all the shops were shuttered, where there was tape all over all of the chairs. So I was very nervous to get on the plane because I had suffered from aerophobia, born of having huge amounts of anxiety, and got on the plane saying to myself, well, don't be so silly. You've taken about 500 flights in the last 4 years. What's there to worry about? You can handle this. And I got on the plane, and as we turned onto and I hope I don't trigger any of you aerophobes, as the plane turned onto the runway, I went, I'm not good. I'm not going to be able to do this. I really am not. And as we all know, that's the point of no return. So we hurtled down the runway, and because I'd been kind of avoiding seeing the doctor for years and all of that nonsense, I just was certain that I wasn't at the peak of physical health, regardless of all the walking and stuff. Hurtled down the runway, and as we took off, I became absolutely certain that I was going to have a heart attack. And so I called for help. And that was, I guess, the low point. Calling for help as a plane is taking off. It's a humiliating, and it was something that really, really, really just disturbed me massively. I sought help in the shape of going to the doctor, getting fully checked out on various bits, and the results were not dire, but they weren't great. I went to a psychologist who actually diagnosed me with general anxiety disorder and said it was quite a kind of a fruity case of it when he dug down into my everyday experience of life, and that being one of periods in between panic attacks. And in a funny way, that was a huge weight off my shoulder, because I always knew that I was a bit bonkers, but it was good to hear that in fact it was just not normal and I needed help. I started CBT, which I did for about 6 months, and I really, really recommend it. It taught me about the physics of panic attacks, and I think one of the most curative things that the CBT therapist said was, the one thing you're not going to have happen to you when you have a panic attack is die. People don't die from them. And if they did, you would have piles of bodies next to roller coasters. That was very helpful. And then I was put by my doctor on the 8 drugs that I'm now taking. And from this moment forth, my ambition is to reduce that number of pills. So that's my kind of dark side of the story. How have I lifted myself out of this? How have I found happiness and serenity in what it is that I would say is my calling? It's something I've been wanting to do since I was, a little lad. Well, the first thing I did is I just reduced the amount of chaos in my life. So I siloed my activities, emails, meetings, Spitfire, composing. I started to add a really profound structure to my day, every day. And that really, really helped me. Took away that, I guess what they say is if every day that you live is different, you have to think about what you're doing that day. And that is a very anxiety-inducing state to be in. Whereas if you're not having to think about what you're doing or what's next, You can clear your mind for the matters in hand. The next thing I did was just try to work out how I could balance the administrative side of what I do and the productive side of what I did. I understand, and I've seen this great seminar by John Cleese, who does not have the same political leanings as I do, but certainly has some insight into creativity. And he said, and it echoes things that I've heard, that when you're interrupted mentally from what it is you're doing, it takes a good 15 minutes to get back into that zone. I looked into productivity, and the universal consensus that I've got from the secondary evidence off the internet is that the maximum a human can hope to be productive in any given day is, at a stretch, 3.5 hours. So I now have a new structured working day that revolves, the most precious part is 4 hours of productivity. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not working the rest of the time or thinking the rest of the time. It is simply when I press output. So my day used to start 3:30, have a shower, have a coffee, get behind the keyboard at 4 and try and get as much done until the phone started ringing and the screen started pinging. So what I do now is I get up probably about 5:30, coffee, and then I do an hour's work in the shed, productivity. This is a magical time where I can really get loads done and lay out what I'm kind of going to be doing for the rest of that productive period. At 7 o'clock, I wake the kids up, cook them breakfast, and sometimes I take them into school. Regardless of that, what I always do at 8 o'clock is take the dogs for a walk. That can be an hour, hour and a half. I then come back, shower, take my 8, clean my teeth, put on some clothes, and try and resume that productivity time by 10 o'clock. Now, when I talk of productivity time, what I do is switch off notifications and turn my phone to airplane mode, and I value the time. It's just hugely important that I use that time responsibly, because that's all I'm giving myself. And if I think back to those 18-hour days, so much of it was just watching YouTubes and just fiddling around, doing kind of nothing, procrastinating. By valuing that time and saying this is all you've got, I just have to press on. The other thing I've changed is my attitude to work. I've been working for 25 years, and people commission me for what it is I do. So instead of trying to be another composer, instead of trying to impress myself, surprise myself, I just go with experience. But sometimes you have those wonderful moments of inspiration and you discover a new chord sequence, a new approach, a new production technique. And that's what I really enjoy sharing with you. The rest of the time, you're relying on your experience. The other thing I really have started to live by is, if you're spending lots of time adding, it means you're going in the wrong direction or you've started out on the wrong path. For me, it's about helping tell a story in as a direct and simple route as possible. I've done recently a romantic score, and there are, I'd say, maybe 10 cues which are just a solo clarinet on their own, and they're always the director's favourite. When you can deliver emotion in a real kind of hardwired way, compositionally, beautifully performed, simply, I think that you will always get the admiration of directors. And the other thing I do is I tend to rely on my first instinct, because what happens if I don't is I overthink stuff. I get too embroiled into the weeds and I really lose focus of the whole thing. So it's not just about working quickly, it's about trusting your first instincts. And I would say my first instinct is correct about 90% of the time. And how do I know about that 10%? Well, the director tells me. That is part of the relationship. And for me, I become thankful to the director, not resentful when they give me notes because they're helping me refine my score. If I refine it too much, I get too attached and I find the receipt of notes very stressful. I now am at a place where I love notes because my score is not refined. I'm refining it with the program, show, game maker. 1 o'clock, I stop. And I don't continue, I stop because I have half an hour to have lunch. And what's really nice is I work close to home, so often that's with my wife. And then I give myself half an hour to get away from the shed and get down to currently Leith. There's a new thing I'm going to talk to you about soon. Subscribe if you would like to hear about that and ding the bell. I give myself half an hour to get down to Leith, and that's when my admin day starts. Spotting sessions, note-taking, meetings for Spitfire Audio, doing Viz docs, reviewing materials from Spitfire, all of that kind of stuff. I then, around 6 o'clock, head back home, take the dogs for another walk, go to the pub for an hour, and then after dinner, which is usually around 7:30, I allow myself tinker time or noodling time, and that is just free time to, if I want to, play on the piano. And often that will be where my really, really good ideas come from. Not because I've had a beer, well, maybe, but mainly because I'm in the moment and relaxed. Anxiety goes with the territory. Again, returning back to John Cleese, he says that what we do as creatives, or by becoming creative, is we allow the ground beneath us to become more porous, the ground beneath us being our subconscious. We allow that to seep through to the surface. And creativity is the craft and art of taking those subconscious, abstract ideas that are seeping through the surface and making them into something. However, other stuff creeps up too, all of that Freudian shit. And I think it is fair to say that having an active mind, an active subconscious, an active imagination means that you imagine the bad stuff too. So we tend to overshare, is a very common trait of creatives. That's where I'm at. And I think, I have to repeat this, that this is not me working for 4 hours a day. This is me producing for 4 hours a day. In that time between that first hour of productivity and 10 o'clock, I'm thinking about, okay, it's interesting. You started that cue. How are we going to get out of that little pickle there? All of these little problems, all these different situations. And the further you go into a job, the more you develop an amazing toolkit of compositional devices that you can employ. And by not giving yourself time to wonder and ponder, I think you don't afford yourself the opportunity of having a rummage in that toy box of different compositional ideas that you've created within a production. And this is why I love multi-episodic so much, because the tool set just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's not about cutting and pasting. It's just about taking ideas and connecting them in the arc of a story. And I am truly, truly as happy as I've ever been as a composer. If there are a series of kind of rules, I would say they are: reduce chaos by creating order, silo your activities, prevent interruptions, self-inflicted or by others, limit the amount of time you spend on those siloed activities, simplify what it is you're doing, and always try to find the simplest route to achieve your creative goals. There's lots of adverts on the internet about reducing the number of words you use in a sentence. It is exactly the same for telling a story with notes of music as opposed to words. Get exercise. I don't think gyms are a great place for exercise. They're hugely stimulating environments, and you don't want that, because for me, exercise is the opportunity to really think about your work. So exercise, getting out and away from that computer screen, I think is absolutely absolutely vital. Don't work weekends. This is your recovery time. There will always be crunch periods. There will always be moments when you can't just spend 4 hours being productive. You'll be on a deadline or a revision will come in. I understand that. This is just an ideal scenario, but it's really important, as any athlete will tell you, it's as much about recovery as it is about the competing, the taking part, the racing, the stretching of what your body and mind can do. You're not going to find inspiration inside a door. You'll find it in the world around you. And as we all know, it only takes a spark to light that furnace, that seam of wonderful, productive adventure. I hope this has been helpful for you. I'd love it if you could comment down below, and I hope I spark debate. I know many of you will have different approaches, and I'd love to hear about that. Is it the Pomodoro thingy, or are you more of a Leonardo da Vinci, work for 4 hours, sleep for 15 minutes, that kind of stuff? As I say, the internet is full of opinions, is full of consensus, is full of echo chambers. What it's not full of is primary experience and evidence. And that's all I'm bringing here is this is what has worked for me. And I would leave you with this one thought. If a client I'm working for has a problem with me spending time with my family at the weekends, then we have a problem. Not him or her, not me. We. I'll leave it at that. One of those for, I don't know, because they're nicer than those. If you can, do subscribe, ping that bell. There's some really exciting stuff coming up. And remember the summer sale, which I think Spitfire is just like knocked it out of the park on this one, ends in literally hours. So jump on that. Remember, when you buy stuff from Spitfire, you're supporting musicians, artists who we pay royalties direct to. Lots of love. Just take care of yourself. I think that they say the one thing when we're within the midst of the narcissism of youth is the ability to empathise with your future self. So take it from me. It's a long journey, so make sure you take lots of water, lots of supplies, and get lots of rest. See you next time.